As we meet in Chicago, we recognize and honor these traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe, also known as the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. Thank you. And thank you for being here, because I think we are all really clear that the climate crisis is not coming, that the climate crisis is here now. Record heat. Why don't you raise your hand if this is affecting you and your community? Record heat. Put up your other hand if you need to. Droughts, keep your hands up. Stronger hurricanes, larger wildfires, wildfire smoke. Look at the room. It's affecting everyone, everywhere, and it impacts everything from our economy to our health to our national security. So you understand that. The party understands that. Joe Biden understands that. And Kamala Harris and Tim Walz certainly understand it. The administration has made addressing the climate crisis a priority since day one and hasn't stopped since. On their first day in office, in a direct rebuke to Trump and his disastrous environmental policies, the Biden-Harris administration announced the U.S. would rejoin the Paris Agreement. With two monumental legislative achievements, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, we're celebrating the second anniversary of that, just 3 days ago. The Biden-Harris administration centered the environment and addressed the climate crisis, and taken together, those two bills were the boldest and largest ever investment in tackling the climate crisis in history. The administration has worked aggressively to reduce the impact of fossil fuels. Late last year, thanks in significant part to U.S. leadership, nearly 200 countries took the historic step of agreeing to a global pact to transition away from fossil fuels. Some of you were there when this was happening. The Biden-Harris administration has signed executive orders to establish the American Climate Corps, yes, and to pursue the Justice 40 initiative, which ensures that at least 40% of climate investment benefits go to the communities that are marginalized by underinvestment and overburdened by pollution. And they've used their authority to protect land, protect our green spaces and our wild creatures, conserving more than 24 million acres of public lands and channeling more than 18 billion toward conservation projects. This is an amazing record. It's one that we can win on and we can run on, because Trump and Vance, they don't just want to roll back. They don't want to just roll back the progress that we've made in the last 4 years. They want to roll back 4 decades of progress. The contrast is crystal clear. Kamala Harris has been a tireless and effective environmental leader throughout her entire career, from her days as an attorney general through to her time in the Senate, with her key role in implementing the climate agenda of the administration. She is an ally. She is a champion. And when we put her in the White House, she will build on the incredible record of the last 4 years. We are going to be there. We are going to be there every step of the way to put her in the White House and to elect Democrats up and down the ballot. So we have an amazing agenda. And before we get to Randi Weingarten and our panel, I want to take just a few minutes to highlight the work that the council has done and will too to ensure we turn out climate voters, and mention a way for you to get involved, because we would love to be working directly with all of you. It is an honor to be the chair of this council and to work with the team that makes it all possible. My vice chair, David Green, council secretary and director of Black Engagement, Dr. Allison Stevens, director of Native Engagement, Ruth Anna Buffalo, director of AAPI Engagement, Howard Cho, our youth director, Paul Pressendu, is amazing, couldn't be here. As a council, we rely on a team of volunteers and an advisory board from the fields of health, mental health, renewable energy, faith, community, and more. And I'm going to ask these people to stand up and wave as I kind of mentioned the group they're from. The leaders of the growing coalition of state and local Democratic Party environmental caucuses and councils. We've got them in 25 states. Come on, stand up. Where's Ron? Yeah, Rob, Wesley. There we go. Thank you. Not only in 25 states, there are over 50 local, county, and city Democratic environmental caucuses and councils, and we've also got the Young Democrats, and we just established a high school Democrats chapter. So really proud about that. And many thanks to the staff and volunteers who worked so hard to make this happen. Especially want to recognize Maggie Van Heemst, who's watching at home, and Tyleek McMillan, who's over there. Yeah, thank you so much. And Hurley Rosemond. They've just done yeoman's work in making this happen. And I'm so honored that joining us today, I don't know if they're here yet, but Gina McCarthy, former EPA administrator and advisor to President Biden on climate, and Michael Regan, current EPA administrator, will be joining us in the audience. The council launched in 2020. We are the newest DNC council or caucus. And we launched in order to empower and elevate those most impacted by the climate crisis, to further the Democratic Party's commitment to protect our environment and tackle the climate crisis, and to elect Democrats, because that's one way to fight the climate crisis. In 2023, we held or participated in more than 35 events from DC to Minnesota, from Pennsylvania to West Michigan, including state Democratic Party environmental meetings, events at the White House and the Vice President's residence, packed enthusiastic meetings at DNC gatherings, which, by the way, are open to the public. And in 2024, we are doubling down. So we've held more than 30 events already and co-sponsored a presidential campaign fundraiser, and we continue our advocacy to end fossil fuel subsidies and more. We held our third annual Netroots Nation panel about how to engage younger voters on climate. And this election year, we continue to tour the country in person and virtually, events in red states, blue states, purple states, because climate is on the ballot in 2024 and in every election. A significant part of our work, I started to mention before when we recognized those great leaders, it is organizing with the Democratic Environmental Network, called DEN affectionately, which we founded and believe it's the National Network of Democratic Environmental Caucuses and Councils, with newly launched chapters in DC, Iowa, and as I mentioned, the wonderful high school Democrats. During our Earth Month 2024 mobilization, we supported and publicized more than 30 Democratic environmental events across the country, and our distributed map, all of this available at our website, dncclimate.org. Our distributed map provides support for Democratic climate events. You want to hold one? You let us know. We'll get it up there. We'll publicize it. We'll email it out. We'll get it on social media. We offer messaging advice to state groups and parties to help win on climate. So here's my pitch. I'm a Democrat. I'm an organizer. You knew there had to be a pitch. I want you to sign up now with the council. You can get out your phone, and here's what you get if you do. You will get an email with the slides that are presented here at this meeting, which are so important. We're going to have some great presentations. So you can connect with us on social media as well and stay in touch. And now, I could not be more thrilled to introduce an unflinching ally of our movement. She is someone who really needs no introduction. She is a labor leader. She is a tireless advocate for teachers, for our kids, and for education. And she is an unwavering ally of the environmental movement. Every time I've ever asked Randi to do something, she's always said yes, because she understands the connection between the labor movement and the environmental movement better than anyone else in this country. She understands that we are one movement with a shared vision, a better country for the next generation. And I'll tell you this, you will not find anyone in the country who will do more to put Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the White House than Randi Weingarten. So please join me to welcome her.
So you can hear it in my voice already. Thank you. I've done 2 screaming speeches in the last hour already, so you're not getting a screaming speech. But I mean, who knows if you're not getting a screaming speech? But first off, thank you for that introduction. I do want to say that I was really honored by the invitation to this caucus and because of what that represents. And So often, if I may be in the, witnessing by live stream and by thousands of friends here, so often within even democratic politics, there's always this division. And for years, there was this division between people who were environmental activists. I'm not saying anything that all of you don't know, but you're wondering, really, will a labor leader actually now say this? But between environmental activists and between some of us in the labor movement who actually work for industries that include coal, fossil fuel, all of that. And so at the end of the day, part of what we're doing as a labor movement and part of what we're doing as an education union, and right now we're not just education, we have become the second largest nurse union, we've become the largest higher ed union, we're a public employee union, is that we actually have to prove that by the work we do, that what unites us is more important than what will divide us. And so as a labor movement, one of the reasons I was honored to be here is because the climate is essential for all of us. And what we have to actually do is we have to prove to people who are saying, oh my God, look at these gas prices, what are we gonna do? We have to prove that what is most important is that we actually have a climate in the next generation or the next 100 years. That it doesn't actually matter what industry you're working in if the planet is boiling, or if there are floods that are so far extreme, like we just saw in Connecticut in the last 24 hours. Like we just saw so many other places. If you cannot actually breathe in a school, not just because you have asthma like me, but because in May it is 120 degrees outside and you do not have air conditioning in a school, how is it that a child is going to learn or a teacher is going to be able to teach? So part of why I was honored to be invited is because we have to make the climate issues real for every single person in America. That they have to see that the climate and fighting for the climate is as important as fighting for a dignified wage, as important as fighting for retirement, as important as fighting for democracy. Because if we have a burning climate, no one is going to be able to live here. So that's the narrative story that all of us, particularly those of us who didn't grow up in the climate movement, we have to do as fiercely as those of you who grew up in this movement. And so there are two things. The contrast is easy. Really, having Trump basically say to the fossil fuel execs, give me $1 billion and I will do whatever your bidding is, that used to be called bribery. I thought that was illegal, but maybe if you have 34 felony convictions already, that line is a little blurred. But what I think is really the last kind of two things I want to say is this. If you look at what has happened in terms of the IRA and the other climate initiatives that have happened under the Biden administration, and I heard people say this already. There's no administration that has done more not only to fulfill the Paris Climate Accords, but to do more in terms of really changing what is going on in terms of our climate and our needs. And we need to give the Biden administration that kind of credit for the work that they have done. And next, and this is the big thing, we need to make sure that Trump and Project 2025 and this is the last thing I'm going to say, that they do not try to divide our country and scare people into sitting on the sidelines when we keep saying we must do more in terms of climate. We do have a climate emergency. We need to do more. And Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, when elected, will do more. But we got to get them elected. So what I would suggest we do is take the one thing, I'm going to end as a teacher. Take the one thing, instead of talking about big goals, and take the one thing that you know is really, really important about climate. For me, it's breathing, because I'm an asthmatic, and a lot of kids I taught are asthmatics. How are we going to make it better if we don't reduce emissions? How do we make it better in the Bronx if we don't reduce emissions? Take one thing that you know is really important to you and use that as the way in which we explain this climate emergency and why we need to make sure that the air we breathe, that the water we drink is not only important today, but for our kids and our grandkids and every generation we bequeath this world to. Thank you very much. See, the water we drink.
Wow. As a former teacher myself, I have to say, teachers rock. And I am so excited that we're going to put a teacher into the position of vice president. It's about time. It is very exciting to introduce Governor Healey, whose election and governance have and are breaking through one glass ceiling after another. You're going to hear me say the word first a whole bunch of times. She is Massachusetts' 73rd governor and its first woman governor, its first openly LGBTQ person elected to office. And in just her first year leading the state, Governor Healey appointed the nation's first cabinet-level gubernatorial climate chief and coordinated a statewide response to the climate crisis. I'm so glad that she is speaking with us. She is a leader in every single sense of the word. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Wow. Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, I am here. I am Maura Healey. I'm very proud to be the governor of the great state of Massachusetts. It was Massachusetts that years ago sued George Bush's EPA to get them to regulate greenhouse gases. So we've got some history. And yes, I'm lucky that the people of Massachusetts elected me. I was the first governor elected, and we also flipped a seat in the process. I also joined, as you noted, my good friend Tina Kotek. We were the first lesbians ever elected governor in the country. So look, I'm proud to be a governor of a state that doesn't just talk about climate. We lead on this. I actually grew up in a different state. I grew up just over the border in New Hampshire. I was raised by a single mom. She was a school nurse. She had 5 of us, kept us busy with sports, which is what ultimately led me to play basketball in college, and then I played professionally overseas. And I say that just because teamwork, is what it's about to me. It's how I lead, it's how I govern, and it's how we get things done. And I want to applaud all of the activists in this room for all you do in your communities, in your state, in this country, and in this world to bring about the change that we need. So thank you, thank you, thank you. My first day of office, I did do something. I issued my first executive order, and it was to create the country's first ever climate chief. She sits atop everything and makes sure that we're driving a climate agenda across all of government, because climate change doesn't just impact our environment, it impacts every aspect of every person's life. Massachusetts, as we speak, is home to the country's largest offshore utility scale wind farm. It's powering homes and businesses as we speak. We're the first state to launch a green bank that's focused on affordable housing. We know we have to decarbonize manufacturing, housing, and transportation to get where we need to be. And I'm proud of that record. But I'll say this, we could not have done this without the Biden-Harris administration. It has meant more than $1 billion in funding coming to Massachusetts for climate alone, $300 million grant to upgrade our grid for offshore wind, more money for solar across our state. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have understood what it means to be there for our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And I know that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz understand the same. I say that not only as a governor, I say that as somebody who sued Donald Trump over 100 times, sued Exxon. Many of those suits were about fighting his efforts to roll back important protections. So we cannot go back. That's what this convention is about. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will not let us go back. We've got 78 days until this election. Everyone has to dig deep. Think about your grandkids and whether or not they should inherit a planet polluted or one free from pollution. Do you want to say no to fossil fuels and a clean energy future? Do you want to build an economy like we're trying to do in Massachusetts that is cleaner and greener and creates great paying jobs? That's what we're on the cusp of, everybody. That's what we can further and do. This is about making progress over chaos, moving us forward as a country. Thank you for all you're doing, and let's go Harris-Walz.
I am so proud and impressed by the work that our Democratic governors are doing all across this nation. Can we give another big hand to Governor Healey? And all our governors, thank you so much. That was so inspiring. Well, this is another person who really needs no introduction, but I love him so much, I'm going to give him an introduction anyway. Congressman Khanna is a friend of our movement, a champion of the environment, and just about the best ally you could ask for in Congress. He has spent his career fighting for clean air, clean water, clean soil, solutions to the climate crisis. He's a friend of mine and the council. I could not be more thrilled to have him here today. We are lucky to have him in Congress, and we are lucky to have him here. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I love the energy here. You got the biggest caucus here at the DNC. Chose the priority of climate. Let me tell you what's at stake and why we need to win this election and make Kamala Harris the next president of the United States and win back the House. When we had control of the House, I got to chair the Environment Committee. And when we win the House again, I'm going to get to chair that committee again. And I'll tell you what we did. I'll tell you why it matters. Because we pushed then, we had Greta Thunberg testify, and we said we've got to stop the subsidies for fossil fuels in this country. When we have President Harris and a majority in the Congress, we will get that done. It is crazy that instead of putting a hand on the scales of solar and wind and hydro, our government is actually putting its thumb on the scale of subsidizing fossil fuels. That needs to end. The other thing we did is we had the Exxon CEO, Chevron CEO, BP CEO, Shell CEO in front of our committee, and they gave millions of documents, and they admitted that they lied to the American public since 1970. They had scientists that knew that burning fossil fuels was causing climate change. They had the best scientists in the world, but they chose to lie. And why does that matter? Because had we started in the 1970s diversifying even 1%, moving to solar, to wind, to hydro, we wouldn't be in this mess. We would have created a lot more jobs, and we wouldn't have displaced people who were dependent on the lies of the fossil fuel companies. We need to hold the fossil fuel companies accountable. They need to pay for their lies to the American people. And we need to talk about how they are posing a risk to our national security, because it is their fossil fuels that is dealing and empowering Iran and Russia and all of the authoritarian states. If we move to solar, wind, hydro, it's good for national security. Let me tell you one final thing. That I was in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where I introduced the New Steel Act. And I want people to know this about the Green New Deal, because people have all these misconceptions about the Green New Deal. All the Green New Deal says is we're going to build new industry, new steel, new aluminum, new iron, new industry in America. We're going to create new jobs in the places that were deindustrialized, and it's going to be good for the climate, and it's going to have less carbon footprint. That will be the vision under President Harris. No fossil fuel subsidies, a holding accountable of big oil, and a reindustrialization of this country that's going to make America lead as a climate champion in the world. Thank you for what you're doing. Let's elect Harris-Walz as President and Vice President. Thank you very much.
Sorry, a little tech trouble there. Wow, another amazing, inspiring speaker. We are now going to begin our panel. So our officers are going to file off and our panel members are going to file on, and I'll go ahead and introduce them while they are coming up. So I've been looking forward for many weeks to this panel. It's about the achievements of the Biden-Harris administration and how we message, organize, and energize based on those achievements in order to win in 2024. We have an absolute rock star panel. We've got Peggy Shepard, a national leader on advancing environmental justice in urban communities, who's not only the co-founder and executive director, just moving my stuff to get out of the way of the panelists. She's the co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice, and she also co-chairs WEJAC, which is the White House Environmental Justice Advisor Committee. She's won multiple major awards for her leadership on climate justice. My union sister and fellow Michigander, Liz Ratzloff, she's a scientist, a labor organizer, and co-executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability, which is building the labor climate movement to achieve a sustainable, just future, just as we heard about from President Randi Weingarten. Mark Magaña is the founding president and CEO of GreenLatinos, and as a member, I can testify that Mark knows how to put together conferences and events where you learn so much about federal climate policy. It's good and mostly good, impacts, good under the Biden-Harris administration, impacts on Latina communities, environmental justice, and have a lot of fun doing it. Mark has served as senior staff at both the White House and congressional leadership and was the first Latino to do both of those, correct? Got it. Megan Chan is the vice president of programs for our good friends at Friends of the Earth Action and is board chair of Amazon Watch and founder of BankTrack. She makes good trouble holding big money accountable. Thank you. And finally, Danielle Deiseroth, a longtime friend to this council, who's the executive director of progressive polling firm Data for Progress, and who started there in climate and environmental polling. So she's got her feet rooted in the right place. And now I cannot wait to kick off this conversation. But first, let's give them a big hand for being here. At the top, I just listed, some of the many accomplishments of this administration, and it's great policy. But we all know that we need to turn great policy into great politics. So how do we use these accomplishments to turn out voters? It's really important. And I was going to ask Peggy Shepard to please kick us off first.
So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, first, we have to understand what the Biden-Harris administration has done. And in those first 100 days, Biden signed the executive order directing agencies to address environmental justice. Now, as co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, we have focused on bringing money and bringing services to communities of color to really address environmental inequity and the extreme weather that climate change brings, such as flooding and drought. Regular folks really need to understand the linkages between climate change and extreme weather events and local needs and impacts. We just had an amazing rain and flooding in the East Coast yesterday. We've got to link those kinds of events to climate policy so that regular folks who aren't thinking about these issues every day really understand what it means to them and their neighborhoods. They've got to really feel the impact. You know, I was on a neighborhood bus and some folks were joking because they had just gotten a text from Biden to give money. And so when we got off the bus, they said, well, you know, millions of dollars are coming into our neighborhood and our communities, and you really should understand that. And they said, thank you for telling me, but I don't feel it. And so I think we also have to understand what are the buttons that really motivate people. And we've got to push those buttons. And we've got, as climate advocates, we've also got to message education, housing, and the issues, health issues that people are really thinking about, pocketbook issues. So we've got to also be able to talk about climate policy, but talk about it in the perspective of other household issues that people are really concerned about. And so, again, the pocketbook issues are really important, but I believe we can craft a message that really links climate together with neighborhood issues of housing, education, and health.
Thank you. And anyone want to jump on that? Excellent idea. Other thoughts? Michelle? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just, the messaging is so important, and I think, you know, linking it to, kitchen table issues and storytelling, which is something that We Act, for example, does very, very well. Labor Network, I mean, all of those organizations that are represented here do. Having people tell stories of how it's impacting them personally is really, really crucial and helps.
And the impacts we're feeling right now, I mean, this is the perfect time.
Yeah.
And we've got to follow up these incidents with the message.
Yeah, thank you. So we know turning out younger voters will be key to this election, and we also know that climate is a key issue for them. How can we best target those voters and turn them out using the environment? And I'm going to ask Danielle to respond first, and I think she's going to be sharing some slides, right? Shall I start them?
Yes.
You cue me when to go ahead.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for having me here today. And I am so honored to be here and excited to share new research from Data for Progress, where I'm the executive director. And all of this polling is hot off the press, just conducted a few weeks ago. So what our poll finds, as what many of us in this room know to be true, is that climate change continues to be a major issue for voters this election cycle. We find that almost a third of all voters say that climate change is more important for their vote choice this year as compared to the last election. And this is especially true for Democrats, for young voters, and for Latino voters. To really underscore this point, on the next slide, only 28% of voters say that climate change is not important to their vote at all. Meanwhile, over half say it's important to them, and 14% of voters say that a candidate's stance on climate change is a deal breaker for whether or not they will vote for them. So what do voters think about Vice President Harris's plans to address climate change? Well, almost half say they have a positive view of her plans, but that number skyrockets to almost 2/3 when we look at voters who say they have heard at least some about her plans to tackle climate change. And I think this really underscores the importance of how delivering Vice President Harris's record on climate change throughout her career is critical over these next few months as we get closer to Election Day. And what we found with our partners at Climate Power is that Vice President Harris's record of tackling climate change and pollution throughout her career enjoys widespread bipartisan support. On the next slide, you'll see that across the board, issues ranging from strengthening the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act, to passing the landmark Inflation Reduction Act, to tackling big polluters for how they've harmed communities, enjoy support across party lines. As we've heard so many times, climate change doesn't care whether you live in a red state or a blue state. And to see how voters across the political spectrum back Vice President Harris's record on climate is really remarkable. We also find, on the next slide, that over 60% of voters want Vice President Harris to carry the legacy that she's established with President Biden of tackling climate change head on. And voters want to see her continue passing ambitious climate action should she win a next term. And finally, just to do a little bit of a comparison, public opinion has remained remarkably stable over the past 4 years. We asked these questions back in 2020 and asked them again just a few weeks ago. And what we find is that over half of voters would be more likely to support a presidential candidate who supports making historic investments in clean energy infrastructure to create millions of new union jobs, building clean energy infrastructure, and creating an environmental justice fund to invest in communities that have disproportionately borne the brunt of pollution and climate change. And we know that Vice President Harris believes in all of these policies here. So this is what voters want to see.
Thank you so much. So, based on your own experience, both based on what Peggy said and what Danielle has said, we know messaging is important. What are the best messages we can use? Are they different for different communities, different ages, different geographies? And I was hoping Mark would kick us off with that conversation, and I hope everyone else will jump in.
Well, thanks, Michelle, and a big applause for you for taking on this role and for bringing us together and have the vision to do this work that the whole caucus does. Mark Magaña, founding president of GreenLatinos. We're a nationwide network of Latino environmental conservation climate justice advocates. We use our convening power to resource each other. We are a resource intermediary, and we are an advocacy coordinator. I'm speaking to you today as Mark Magaña, the son, the brother, the father, the husband, that cares deeply about what happens to my children and the future generation. Messaging-wise, it's easy to recite the broad, groundbreaking work that the Biden-Harris administration has done, from tackling the climate crisis with IRA and BIL to protecting the environment, huge movements to protecting large swaths of land, air, water, and ocean, and supporting EJ communities across the country. And we really have had, from the very first week, the focus on how we make sure that everyone benefits from this, EJ communities and all. And that's been a vital message. We need to increase the base of people who take this issue first and foremost and make sure that they're at the table. So we've been given the tools to make sure we can get the work done. But these record resources are only the beginning. We can't just be satisfied. There are many people that say that we have to have 5 times the amount as was in IRA and BIL to be able to tackle the climate crisis, just to start. We all need to get involved in the implementation of the IRA and BIL. We, for instance, GreenLatinos, we started something called Colaborativo 40, which was our effort to make sure that the Latino community, in partnering with the major Latino organizations, were ready for BIL and IRA and to be able to take advantage of these. We, for instance, GreenLatinos, had never thought that we would ever be a government grantee. But we decided that we were going to take the step, and my staff still hasn't forgiven me, but we're a USDA and EPA primary and sub-grantee. And it's been great to be able to help resource our community so that they can see these benefits. It's vital that the message that we, here and now, know that we're called upon right now to be the greatest generation, that we are the first generation to see the effects of the climate crisis and the last generation to be able to do anything about it, that we take lessons from our previous generations, our grandparents, our parents who sacrificed for us, who either immigrated or went through wars or a depression or held 3 jobs, who really sacrificed to make sure that their future generations had better opportunities. And that we know that now that mantle is on us, that we must do what it takes to match those greatest generations to be able to make sure that our future generations are able to have a livable planet.
The Vice President Harris, has always heeded this call. When she was the first AG to set up a California statewide Environmental Justice Commission. When she was, yes, years before anyone else did it. When she introduced in the Senate the Environmental Justice for All Act, the groundbreaking EJ bill. When she pushed for billions in clean electric school buses so that kids wouldn't be dying of asthma in the rate that they're dying now. This is the work that she did unnoticed for many years, but because she knew it was the right thing to do. I recently spoke to President Biden, and I told him he has two of the world's most important jobs. The second is president. First is grandfather. He nodded, he gave me his $1 million smile, and he agreed. We must be able to look our children and our grandchildren in the eyes when they ask us, what did you do when you had a chance to save the people on the planet? What did you do? We need to be able to look them in the eye and say, we marched. We organized. We rallied. We passed legislation. We got out the vote. We stopped a racist, fascist, felon, climate denying from being elected and being back into the White House, and we were able to move climate believers like the future President Harris and Vice President Walz into the White House. This is our message, and we need to carry it forward.
Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly pass out the slides to the panelists, which I mentioned to you before, so they have them to refer to as they speak. But as I'm doing that, I am going to pose the next question, which is, what is one thing everyone in this room can do over the next few weeks to turn out climate voters? And I'm going to ask Liz to kick off the question to that, the answer to that.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm Liz Ratzloff, the co-executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability, and we're building a powerful movement of labor and climate, a powerful labor climate movement, so that we're fighting for just transition and ensuring that we have an ecologically sustainable and economically just society and world for everyone to live in. And one of the important things that touches on a lot of the questions that Michelle has asked today is the fact that with the climate crisis and addressing the climate crisis, we have the opportunity to solve a whole lot of different issues that are the priorities of climate voters too. Racial justice and income inequality, especially for young voters. This is something that is a huge, huge priority. They don't want just climate action. They want intersectional, real change that's going to make a difference in people's lives. And that's what we can use this opportunity with the climate crisis to do. We have seen, I'm so glad that Randi Weingarten from AFT was here. We see educators across the country starting climate councils in their unions, fighting in their workplaces for green schools, for investments in their communities. And they're really on the leading edge of the labor movement, taking a stand and leading on real climate action that makes a difference in people's lives. And we see folks at local governments who are looking at their budgets that are going to be decimated or already being decimated by the climate crisis and natural disasters in their area. That directly affects the bottom line of the local governments of what their salaries, their co-worker salaries, could possibly be in the future. And so we see folks organizing together, using their power as a worker, not just as a voter, not just as a community member, but also as a worker, demanding that their employers are part of the solution and don't continue to contribute to the climate crisis. And because of the incredible investments that we have, especially at the local level, there's an opportunity for workers to come together and ensure that everyone can make a living wage on a living planet. And so one thing that everyone can do is talk to their coworkers. Talk to their coworkers about how the climate crisis affects you, how your priorities are potentially affected by the climate crisis, whether it's natural disasters, effects on public budgets, or pollution in communities. and talk about how, in addition to voting, to electing climate champions, we can ensure that we're getting affordable housing, expansion of mass public transit, all solutions to the climate crisis, and also things that will make meaningful changes in people's lives that everyone wants to see.
Thanks, I love that. We often talk about talking to your friends and your family, but also talking to your coworkers is incredibly important. Any other very quick 10 to 30 second responses to that question? Go ahead.
Just to underscore your point, what we see in our polling is that folks say that they trust their friends, their families, their community groups the most to deliver them news about climate change. So the importance of talking to who you know, it just really cannot be more stated. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right. So what, how do we get, there's still a false narrative out there. A false narrative that climate is not a voting issue. And it's a big question. How do you push back on that? We've got the data, right? But what are some things that we can do? And I was going to ask Michelle to jump in and respond to that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Michelle, for putting this all together. It's really impressive and great. Michelle Chan, Vice President of Programs for Friends of the Earth Action. And we do, in fact, have the polling. Danielle's just shared some super hot off the press polling with us just minutes ago. But for those who are getting out the vote and trying to figure out, well, should I go and knock on the door? Should I go to talk to people, with climate change first in mind? There's some fantastic polling that also shows that 72% of young voters who say they care about climate are more likely to be extremely likely to vote at the rate of like 72%. And that is compared to about 57% of young voters who say that they would be likely to vote. So we know that people who care about climate really are more likely to vote. So that's a great reason to go out and lead with that. I mean, and for electeds and candidates who are wondering, well, should I lead with climate as well? Yes, because we know that elections are close, right? And even though that climate may not be the number one issue, that, Biden took Georgia by 10,000 votes, right? Climate is enough of an issue to matter. There is some fantastic studies out of University of Colorado who show that climate change was materially impactful in the last two elections, right? Mm-hmm. And honestly, if you don't include climate change in your platform, there's going to be plenty of people out there looking at you with side eye saying, what's wrong with that? And so just to close off, I wanted to speak a little bit to the messaging issue, because we know that messaging to young voters is super important. Biden and Harris did a great job with the Inflation Reduction Act, and we need to keep Harris in the White House because she needs to continue the job of holding the fossil fuel industry to account and taking on the fossil fuel industry, right? And we know this really, really matters to young people. Yeah, I mean, they care about the renewable side, but they really do care about taking on the fossil fuel industry. So just as Khanna said, I think his messaging is spot on. Take on the fossil fuel industry. She has a good track record as AG in taking on Chevron, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, et cetera, and cut those fossil fuel subsidies. We have an incredible chance next year as the Trump tax cuts kind of come to a close. There's going to be a big fight. And most fossil fuel subsidies are tax giveaways, right? So we can do this.
Thank you. We don't need to be giving money away to the fossil fuel companies. So I am so grateful to our panelists. As they leave the stage, let's give them a big hand. That was an excellent conversation. And I invite the council's officers to join me on the stage here for our next wonderful speaker. I'm going to begin. Thank you so much. That was really, really special, important, and I learned a lot. So I'm going to ask the council officers to please join me on the stage as I introduce our next speaker. And I'm just going to highlight what's coming up next. We've got Congresswoman Kathy Castor, Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, Dr. Beverly Wright, one of the foremost environmental justice leaders in this country, is going to give a presentation on the history of the environmental justice movement, which is such an important part, and it leads the way in the climate movement. And we've also got Representative Sean Casten and speakers from a couple of our key ally organizations. It is hard to imagine Congress making the incredible progress on climate that it has during the Biden-Harris administration without the insightful, smart leadership of Congresswoman Kathy Castor, whose constituents in the Tampa Bay, Florida area live on the climate front lines. And she brings her deep knowledge to her work as chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. As a former county commissioner myself, I love that Representative Castor started her elected work on the Hillsborough County, Florida Commission. Yes. Yay, county commissioners and former county commissioners. And that her critical work at national and international levels is informed by the experience of heading up a county environmental commission, which is what I also do now. So please, let's give her a warm welcome.
Well, good afternoon, friends. How are you? The energy is infectious around this Democratic convention for Kamala Harris and my good friend Tim Walz, elected the same year in 2006 when we were called the majority makers. And we handed the gavel to Nancy Pelosi, who has been a clean energy champion her whole career. But if you remember at that time when the Democrats took the House in 2006, she created the first climate committee. It was called the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. And in the House, we passed a far-sighted bill at that time, Waxman-Markey. But we never got it across the finish line in the United States Senate. Well, that changed when we handed Pelosi the gavel again a few years later. And she created the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And she asked me to help lead the charge and chair that committee. And we developed, with a lot of you and folks all across this country, whether you were farmers, scientists, from the faith community, from labor, we crafted a climate crisis action plan. One of the climate champions who served on that committee is Congressman Sean Casten, who's right here from the Chicago area. You're gonna if you don't know Sean, you're gonna love Sean. But our committee, we made about 700 policy recommendations at that time. When Joe Biden won the White House and we took the Senate, we were able to enact over 300 of those policy recommendations into law through the Inflation Reduction Act, America's historic clean energy law, the bipartisan infrastructure law. And now, as we look forward, we have so much more to do. It's urgent. But just think, we just celebrated the two-year anniversary of the IRA. It was announced that 3.4 million Americans have now saved over $8 billion on their electric bills or buying an electric vehicle or a heat pump. We've reestablished our leadership in the world. And do you think it's time to go back? Hell no, it's not time to go back. We're going to say Trump wants to take us out of the Paris Agreement? That's so decades ago. Look, it's urgent. We have a climate emergency on our hands. We've got to build on the successes of our historic clean energy law, lower people's energy bills, build stronger, more resilient communities, make sure that frontline communities, environmental justice communities all across America enjoy the benefits of cleaner, cheaper energy and safer communities. What's your favorite part of Project 2025, by the way? Is it we're going to hand the power back to polluters? No, that's not my favorite part. Is it you're going to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement again and withdraw Americans' leadership from the international stage? No, we're not doing that. Is it maybe that wasn't Project 2025, but what maybe you it got your attention when Donald Trump sat down with polluters at Mar-a-Lago and said, you give me $1 billion and we'll roll back the IRA. People need to know this across the country. More Americans are awake to the impacts, the cost of climate, the climate emergency than ever before. And you're the leaders. You're the frontline messengers who we need to help tell the story about how we are lowering their bills. We're building safer communities. We're growing the middle class. And we see clean energy as an opportunity, a way to innovate and to make sure that America is a leader in the world. So we're not going back, are we? Are you with me? Are we going forward with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as our climate champions? And all of you are going to be an important part of it. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Well done, well done.
We have such amazing leaders in Congress. I'm so grateful, and we gotta, hold the Senate, take back the House, and get the power back where it needs to be. It is very exciting to have Congressman Sean Casten here today on his launch day for the Chicago Convention in his home state of Illinois and very close to his home district. Congressman Casten has spent his entire adult life fighting the climate crisis, and it continues to be his top priority in Congress. He combines his experience running clean energy companies with his background as a scientist. It's good, school teachers, scientists. It's good to get that kind of diverse background into Congress, right? Congressman Casten is vice chair of the Sustainable Energy Environment Coalition, a group of more than 50 members of Congress who are committed to protecting our environment, combating climate change, and growing domestic investment in clean energy. Congressman, thank you so much for hosting us in your city, and thank you for being here today.
Sorry. Those slides are all really good. There we go. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Welcome to Chicago. Thanks to everybody from Chicago who's here. So I want to start, just be a little heavy, but be a little honest too. Don't move, but we're putting you all in a time machine. We're going to go back 29 years and a month, because that was the 1995 heat wave in Chicago. It was what in my memory was the first real thing that was described by the media as a climate crisis. Stated about 100 degrees for a week in Chicago, 740 people died, heavily concentrated in the elderly. Some bodies weren't found until weeks later. It was a horrible event, 1995. 50% of all the CO2 that humanity has ever emitted as a species since we first invented fire hundreds of thousands of years ago has been emitted since 1995. These are like real numbers, right? We can politicize this, but these are real numbers. And they're the kind of numbers that you can completely lose hope unless you're a Democrat and you get to work. I was going to say something else there. Because what Kathy said in Illinois since then, we've largely gotten rid of our coal industry. We've moved to one of the leaders in wind in the country. We've passed rules to make our homes safer. And in Washington, as Kathy mentioned, Kathy has a higher batting average than any other member of Congress. Name any other member of Congress who came up with 700 policy recommendations and 300 became law 2 years later. That does not happen without Kathy Castor. Kathy Castor does not get that job if Nancy Pelosi is not the speaker, which means it doesn't happen unless we have the House. If you elect Democrats, good things happen. Once we pass those laws, the Inflation Reduction Act, which I would remind you, not a single Republican voted for. Since that was passed, we've invested over $400 billion of private money in the United States in clean energy facilities, manufacturing facilities, power plants, EV charging stations. We've cut energy costs for Americans because if you don't have to pay for oil, if you don't have to pay for gas, if you don't have to pay for electricity because you got a solar panel and an EV in your driveway and a well-insulated home, inflation's going down and you're a pretty happy person because you got more money in your pocket, right? We've also put ourselves on a track to lower emissions by 40% over the next decade. But more importantly, we've created hope, right? That the idea that these massive climate changes are unsolvable, it can be paralyzing. But the idea that you elect good people who pass good policies and all of a sudden you're on a trajectory to change, to leave the planet better for your kids, to be back in a leadership position for the rest of the world, that doesn't happen unless we elect Democrats. It doesn't happen without the leadership of Joe Biden. And we're not done. Because by electing good people, we've created good problems. We're building manufacturing in the United States faster than we're growing the workforce, and we got to train the workforce and get them skilled. That in turn is creating more demands for electricity. We're having to build more power plants and more wires and get them permitted. These are really, really good problems. When people say we have an immigration crisis, you know what we have? We have a country that people want to come to and work because we have good jobs. Isn't that better than the alternative, right? All of that happens because we elected good people, and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to continue that trajectory, put them in the White House, put Democrats in power in the House, put the Republicans at the little kids table where they can talk about sharks and electric vehicles and wind turbine cancer all day because the adults got stuff to do. Thank you. Go get them.
That's awesome. I really want to plagiarize that last comment. That was awesome. Yeah, let's put him back there. Dr. Beverly Wright is an advocate, an activist, a scholar, a civic leader, and the founder and executive director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. She's a policy analyst, a leading voice on environmental justice, an advisor to the White House on climate and environmental justice, and I'm very much looking forward to this important presentation she is making to us today. I always learn so much from her, for which I'm grateful, as I am grateful for the gift of her time, her presence, her deep knowledge. Every time she talks, we learn something new. So let's please welcome Dr. Beverly Wright. Be sure to join the council at dncclimateorg.org/convention because you're going to want these slides. So you just push the down button.
Yes, gotcha.
Just that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm absolutely honored to be here today at the DNC, and included among others who are leading on climate and environmental policy by placing equity and justice in the center of the calculation. Without one, we can't have the other, and I think that we all recognize that. Today, I'd like to begin with just a really short presentation. I only have 5 minutes, so it means that I'm going to have to skip some information that wasn't relevant anyway. About where we began and where we are now. I'd like to just begin by showing this picture. Dr. Bunyan Bryan at the University of Michigan, who was so instrumental in our movement getting to where it is now and responsible for educating almost every person of color and white student in environmental science. He passed just this year, and I'm sorry he won't be here to vote for the Harris-Walz ticket. But this is why he's important. In 1999, there was a group called the Michigan Group that Bunyan Bryan brought together. These are all of us who were there at the time. I challenge you to find me on there. I was very young, and it's hard to know who I am, but I am there. And at this group, we came together to try to figure out how to get the federal government engaged on environmental justice or the pollution of our communities and the health of people of color in general. From that first meeting, there's almost a straight line to the development of the Office of Environmental Equity in 1991, later changed to the Office of Environmental Justice by a community person who basically told us, what do you mean by environmental equity? Does that mean you want poison spread out among everybody? I don't want any person to have poison. It ought to be justice. That's how that term changed from the Office of Environmental Equity to environmental justice by a community leader. But things began to change, and there were some really big events I'm going to take you through very quickly because I only have 5 minutes. So look quickly. So in 1991, we had the first People of Color Summit. In 1991, there was something called the National Minority Environmental Health Conference, where all of these agencies came together to try to deal with our health. In 1992, there was the EPA Equity Report that really began focusing on communities that were hurting. In other words, we've been saying this, you call it anecdotal. Where's the research to support exactly what we're saying? So that began the beginning of that kind of work. And in 1993, EPA actually formed the NEJAC, not the knee jerk, the NEJAC. And I was an original member of that group along with others in the room this evening. In 1994, there was the EJ Health and Research Symposium that brought together over 1,000 persons. We thought it was going to be a smaller number, and 900 plus people showed up in almost like a snowstorm in DC, or ice storm that DC has so often. It was an unbelievable event. And then in 1994, we had the signing of the Environmental Justice Executive Order by President Clinton. That was my first time ever moving into that building. I have 1 minute, watch this. And here we are today, the Biden-Harris era. And what happened since then is amazing. Now watch this very quickly. And they came in 2020, and 2021, I'm going to let you see it because we don't have time to talk. In 2021, Biden administration pulls off the Justice 40 initiative. We know what that is. And 22, the Inflation Reduction Act. And 22, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And 22, the EPA creates the Office of Environmental Justice and External Affairs. And 23, the Executive Order 14096 was formed. In 23, Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Grants and TCGMs were formed. And 24, EPA HANRU. And 24, first ever national goal of zero emissions freight sector set. And this is where we are so that you can see it. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Here we are from 1990 to 1994. Look at us when the Biden-Harris campaign came in. I'm sorry. So I'm excited. I can't imagine what's going to happen now with the Harris Wall campaign, but we are excited and we expect great things to happen. It will be a moonshot again, but in environmental justice. Thank you.
It was wonderful. You were amazing. That was so important and special. And again, you're going to want those slides. So dncclimate.org/convention. It's my honor to introduce Joe Neguse. As a member of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis and the House Natural Resources Committee, Congressman Neguse has become a strong leader on climate action in Congress. In the first term, he secured Colorado as the location of the Climate Crisis Committee's first field hearing. There's some people from Colorado here, right? Howard Cho is right here. Yeah. He has championed climate issues in Congress and has been an unfailing voice in addressing the climate crisis. Let's give him a big hand. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, well, good afternoon, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. I just landed, actually, from Colorado, the state that I am privileged to be able to represent in the United States Congress, and the first group of people that I have the privilege of being able to greet are all of you. And it couldn't be more fitting for me as someone who cares deeply about our planet and is so deeply grateful to every single one of you for all that you are doing to save it. You've heard, I suspect, throughout the day today about the historic actions that we took over the course of these last 4 years because of the work that so many of you have been engaged in year after year, in some cases decade after decade, building the drumbeat for climate action, making the case that it's on us together, collectively, collaboratively, to address what is an existential challenge. I am proud of the work that we did over the last 4 years. I'm proud of President Biden and Vice President Harris's leadership in ensuring that we rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. I'm proud of their leadership in working with the Congress to enact the largest climate investment in the history of the world. That is something for all of us to be proud of. And yet we know that much work remains. I know you all had an opportunity to hear from one of my colleagues, a dear friend and someone who's been a champion for climate action, Kathy Castor from the great state of Florida. She ran the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis that was impaneled back in the 116th and 117th Congresses, a committee which, as was mentioned, I had the privilege of serving on. And although we made a lot of progress in enacting some of the solutions that committee proposed, by the way, solutions that didn't come from us, but came from you, came from countless citizens and scientists and folks engaged in this work throughout the country as part of our field hearings. We made a lot of progress, but there was a lot left on the cutting room floor. We know that there is more to do, which is why I could not be more excited about supporting someone whom I believe has the vision, the moral courage, the clarity of conviction to lead our great country, and that's Kamala Harris as the 47th President of the United States. But look, for those folks who tell you that climate is not gonna have anything to do with this election, I would just disabuse them of that notion. And I see this, my time is coming up, so I'll just tell you why. You look at Project 2025 and you glean what the Republicans have in store if they are given power and the disruptive impact that will have on our ability to ultimately protect our planet, to protect our environment for my children, for your children, for generations to come. It is alarming, it is sobering, and it should repurpose us to do the work that must be done over the course of these next 80 days. So I'm fired up to do it with you, and I'm grateful for all that you have done and you'll continue to do to make sure that we win on November 5th. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you all stick around to the end. We're going to have a big group photo in the back, in the front of the room here, but we're not there yet. We've got a couple more amazing speakers. I would like you to please welcome me in joining David Kieve, the president of the Environmental Defense Fund Action. EDF is one of the most influential and powerful groups in our movement, and David has been a real friend and ally to our council. And this convention is special for him in that prior to joining EDF, he worked for the Biden administration. And before that, he played a central role in help getting the president elected. He first served as director of early states, helping President Biden emerge from the most diverse and talented field of Democratic candidates ever assembled, and worked hard in Nevada. So he understands how Democrats can and should run on climate to win better than many, many, many people. And it is a real pleasure to have him with us here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michelle. It's an honor to be here today. It's particularly an honor because I get to share a program with a couple of my environmental justice heroes and to be in the company of some of the legislators who worked tirelessly to pass the most significant climate law in the history of the world. I'm David Kieve. I'm the president of EDF Action, the advocacy partner of the Environmental Defense Fund. This evening, we'll hear from Joe Biden. He is, simply put, the greatest president we have ever had on climate. I'm optimistic because we've accomplished so much. The Inflation Reduction Act is working. Hundreds of millions of dollars are creating hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs in clean energy and lowering costs for American families. I spoke at a press event in Lansing, Michigan last week. There were two leaders of local business trade groups there talking about the good jobs that are on their way. One of my good friends who helps lead one of the more significant unions in the country working on clean energy shared a story with me. At their national convention, all the business managers were asked to stand up. They were asked to raise their hands if their 5-year look back at their book of business was better than their 5-year look ahead. Not a single hand went up. That's what progress looks like. Friends, we don't need to make America great again, and we aren't failing so badly you wouldn't believe it. This great nation is leading the rest of the world in a race to the top to create more clean energy faster. We cannot afford to go back. I've called Joe Biden the greatest climate president ever, and I'm proud to have worked for him. But I believe Kamala Harris can be greater still. She approaches these issues differently. With Joe Biden, it's climate equals jobs, and I believe in that. But Kamala Harris views it through her experience as a prosecutor and her belief in freedom. Freedom from the threat of extreme weather made worse each year by the acceleration of the climate crisis. Freedom to drink clean water and to breathe clean air, and to live, work, worship, and play in communities where we don't have to worry about environmental harms. I'm excited for the future that a Kamala Harris presidency will bring. And at EDF Action, we are committed to doing our part to make it happen. We're working in partnership with other leading climate groups like the League of Conservation Voters, Climate Power, and others, launching the largest ever environmental advocacy effort our country has ever seen. And we're committed to the greatest grassroots mobilization in our organization's history. All of our electoral engagement is done under the banner of Climate Voters Unite. It's not about being part of EDF Action, it's about bringing together every single person who believes that climate action is absolutely necessary. So please, join us. If you want to learn more, go to edfaction.org or just show up in a campaign office sometime this fall. The future is incredibly important and we need your help. Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Al Eastman, is being introduced by Ruth Anna Buffalo, one of our council officers and director of Native Engagement. Ruth does incredible work.
Dosha relatives, I have the distinct honor of introducing a local community organizer and advocate. Mr. Al Eastman is an environmental scientist and ecologist. He is a member of the Sichangu Lakota from the Rosebud Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. He is a tribal college graduate of Oglala Lakota College. He has experience as a field ecologist, environmental lab manager, and conservationist. He is a community organizer and activist and an archery instructor, currently working at the Metro Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. Please welcome to the stage Mr. Al Eastman.
Thank you. Hello, my relatives. Again, my name is Al Eastman. I'm from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. I've lived in Chicago for about 15 years. And I'd like to thank Michelle, of course, for her invitation to speak here and her tireless work that she does for the DCN Environmental and Climate Crisis Council. Thank you. I've worked in water and environmental sector for about 20 plus years. I've seen a lot of changes over those years. And one of the things that I've seen more recently here in Chicagoland is a lot more flooding. Like it was mentioned, I work for the Water Reclamation District here over in Stickney, for those that are familiar with this area. And we've having a lot more flooding events more intensely, and it's hard to find space for this water to go to. We've been creating different reservoirs to store this water, but unfortunately, we still have combined sewage overflows that go into the lake and the river. The lake is where we get our drinking water, of course, and that's not something we want to see. And it also goes into people's basements, and that doesn't make them very happy. There's a lot of costs for cleanup, and unfortunately, we see a lot of that happening in the black and brown neighborhoods. So, also something that I want to mention that happened just last month that was a little surprising was there's 27 tornadoes that happened in one evening during a storm in the Chicago area. I was working that evening, and it was a pretty exciting ride home from work. That's for sure. It was trees falling down onto homes and into the streets. It was tough. So to combat this, we need to really focus on aging infrastructure that's not able to keep up with this extreme precipitation. And Many communities, they require upgrading water systems, especially in our low-income communities, to help reduce this flooding. We've also seen a lot of record-breaking heat waves that have happened here, creating drought. My relatives back in South Dakota talk about drought. And the bottom line is we just need to elect people that are willing to stand up and fight for the climate crisis and the solutions. I'd like to give thanks, of course, to the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act for the funding for the environmental justice, and also the Tribal Access to Clean Water Act that provides infrastructure projects and promotes tribal independence and governance capabilities, and better access to drinking water, and of course the lead service line replacements that have been happening here in our neighborhoods. One last thing is indigenous sovereignty is a climate solution. And as students of over 80% of the world's biodiversity, indigenous people's leadership is key to ensuring our planet's future. And with that, I'd like to say, help lift up the Native voices. I'm a scientist. There's many like me, and we have answers. Thank you for your time.
Many thanks, and thanks to Ruth Anna for doing the work of reaching out and making sure that we brought Al's voice to be here. Thank you, Ruth. We are very lucky to have with us today Tiernan Sittenfeld. Tiernan is the Senior Vice President of Government Relations at the League of Conservation Voters. As anyone who follows politics can tell you, LCV is an electoral force. In 2020, they spent $115 million to elect climate champions, and they are doing that and more this cycle. Many of the climate achievements of the Biden administration would not have been possible without the climate champions LCV and ally groups have helped put in Congress. Tiernan knows the power of running and winning on climate and has decades of experience doing so. We are fortunate to have her here with us today. Please, Tiernan, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Thanks to all of you. Thank you to the DNC. Thanks to the incredible speakers. What an amazing event. I am so thrilled to be here today with all of you, especially just days after the second anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act that is truly supercharging our clean energy economy, centering good paying jobs and environmental justice. And we have heard from all the speakers today about the incredible progress that we have made. Thanks to President Biden and Vice President Harris, we have made incredible progress at the state level as well. In Minnesota, thanks to Governor Walz, thanks to many incredible governors across the country. We've also heard far too much, frankly, about how horrific another Trump administration would be. It simply cannot happen. We will not go back. So it is absolutely clear that the contrast between a presidential ticket between Vice President Harris and Governor Walz and the Trump-Vance ticket, that contrast has absolutely never been more stark in a presidential election. The stakes for our climate, for environmental and racial justice, for our democracy, for our lands and waters, for all that we hold dear has never been higher, and the need to make more progress has never been greater. So we are so fired up to be here with all of you today with 78 days to go. That's right, 78 days. We have to be all in. So I know everyone here is doing so much, but if you'd like to get more involved, whether it's knocking on doors or making phone calls to get out the vote, LCV has a member mobilization program called Green Roots. We'd love to get you involved in that. If you've already contributed to the campaign, but you'd like to make even greater contributions or more contributions, every dollar counts. We have our Give Green program with our partners at NRDC Action Votes. We're very proud of some of the New York Times just broke the news today about some big advertising that we are doing along with our partners at EDF and at Climate Power Action to make clear that Kamala Harris leans in and leads on climate, on environmental justice. She holds big oil accountable. She's going to be amazing as our next president. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We are with you at every step. Let's go win.
Thank you, Tiernan. So we have one final short comment by our wonderful director of AAPI engagement, Howard Cho. And I want to say after he speaks, we're going to gather in the front for a group photo. But I want to tell you, this has been an incredible, incredible day. And on Wednesday, we have a whole new program with Senators Markey, Senator Merkley, Tennessee Representative Justin Pearson, environmental justice leaders, labor leaders. It's going to be wonderful, and I hope you'll come back and tell your friends to come. Same time, same place. Sounds like, was that Batman? Same bat location? Same DNC Climate Council location. So let's please welcome Howard, and then when he's done speaking, please come on up and get your photo with us to show that our movement is strong, our voice is important, and climate votes are crucial in the Democratic Party. Thank you. I just found out the wonderful news that Congresswoman Stansbury is here. So I'm going to welcome her, and then we'll hear from Howard, and then the photo. Okay, so I introduce another Congresswoman whose constituents truly live on the climate front lines in New Mexico's 1st District. And they are so well represented by Representative Melanie Stansbury. Thank you for someone in the audience who spotted her and alerted me. She's a science educator, a water scientist, and I love that she describes herself as a science and policy wonk. We need more wonks, just like we need more school teachers. It's intersectional. She has fought for people and planet as a state legislator and now fights for us and with us on our behalf in DC. Her voice has been and is going to continue to be absolutely crucial. Please welcome her with me.
All right, well, good afternoon, Democrats! Woo! Do I hear some noise about solving the climate crisis? Yeah! Are you all fired up? Yeah! Are you all ready to solve our clean air, our clean water, protect our lands, protect our sacred spaces, and make sure that we build a livable planet for our people? Yeah! Woo! All right, well, that's what we're about to do. And I'm Melanie Stansbury. I am deeply proud to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. And some of you may know about our district because I took the seat that was held by our nation's very first Indigenous Cabinet Secretary, Deb Haaland, Secretary of Interior. But I have spent my own career working as a bona fide water nerd, working as a drought and water science professional, working as a science educator, a researcher. I worked in the Obama White House. I worked as a staffer, and now am deeply proud to represent my home community in Congress and be fighting to address our climate and water needs every single day. But I'm here today to celebrate the 2nd birthday of the Inflation Reduction Act and to talk about the extraordinary climate leadership of our next President of the United States, Kamala Harris. I am sure it is said and been said probably 20 times this afternoon, but it can't be said enough, that the Inflation Reduction Act represents the largest climate and clean energy bill ever in the history of the United States. But not only is it the largest climate bill in American history, it is the most significant piece of climate legislation ever passed by any country in the history of the world. And do you all know who cast the tie-breaking vote to make it pass in the Senate? Kamala Harris. And if there is any question on her record as a climate leader, as an environmental justice leader, as somebody who's going to continue to propel us forward into our future. Let me tell you, as a member of Congress, I have had a front row seat to her leadership. And I can tell you that the IRA and the climate policies of the Harris-Biden administration are delivering for New Mexico. We have the largest wind field in North America going in. We have the first solar panel manufacturers to come back to the United States since the passage of these bills. And we are building the workforce of the future between the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, and the CHIPS Act, which we all passed 2 years ago. And you all know what will happen if we reelect Donald Trump. He's going to gut our international commitments to climate change. He's going to gut the EPA. He's going to gut the Department of the Interior. And he's going to take us back to the mid-century when rivers were on fire. And we're not going to let it happen. So, if you all care about climate change, and I know you do, if you all care about the environment, and I know you do, and if you care about our people and our fundamental rights to clean air, clean land, and a future and a livable planet, let's get out there, let's elect Kamala Harris, and let's do this!
We're not going back. We're not going back. We're going forward. We're going to build on the progress of this administration, put Kamala Harris and Tim Walz into the White House. We're going to give them Democratic majorities in the Congress. And right now, Howard Cho is going to share a little bit with us about his experience with the climate crisis and then group photo. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all you do. Come back on Wednesday, bring your friends, your coworkers. Thank you. Go ahead. Howard Cho.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, David. Thank you, Dr. Stevens and Ruth. I serve with the best team. Are you all excited? Let me tell you why I fight for this council and why. Because in Colorado, we've had increasing temperatures for the last 30 to 50 years, and actually by 2050, they're expecting it to go another 2 to 3 degrees. We have had droughts, heat waves, and the most dangerous is our Colorado wildfire. So I've seen in my own backyard, not 30 to 40 miles away, where our wildfires is really going out of control because of the heat, the dry soil, the dry trees, and that's really, really affecting our air quality. Because of that, we're having so much issues with not just health in the surrounding area, but our whole ecosystem is damaged. The soil is soft, and it's really affecting our farms. Now, our farms here in Colorado, and no one knows about it, but 81% of our farms are independent. We're not talking corporate, but are owned by small mom-pop farms that's been there for generations. And in order for us to actually continue that commerce, we need to actually battle the climate change that's causing these heat waves, these fires, and a lot of the soils that are breaking down. We really need to make sure that everything we've done has to have climate protection and climate care in mind. Now, I know under this administration of President Biden, we have done such great, wonderful things. If you look at what the IRA has done here, we've done so many great things. We've brought a new $328 million to help fight climate crisis type of mitigations. So first of all, the rebates. We've had tons of rebates for appliances, for heat pumps, for electric stoves. IRA offers $8,000 for a heat pump for space and heating and cooling. We've done tons of grants. This includes a $1 billion grant proposition to make it affordable to have energy efficiency. We need to be we need to avoid all the fossil fuels that we've been using. We need to get out of these corporations, and we need to start renewing our energy. So thank you so much for being here. I want you to know that the IRA has impacted us in so many different great ways. Thank you for being here to fight with us, standing with us. We know we're not going back. We have the best presidential candidate in Vice President Harris and Coach Walz. So let's hear it up for the Democrats. Let's hear it for climate care. Let's do this thing. Thank you so much.
come on up for a group photo, and I think there may be another minute to get photos with our big selfie wall. Be sure to put those out on social media.